My name is Nikki Hall, and I'm going to speak to you with my three different hats on at once. I'm an ophthalmology doctor who is doing scientific research into aniridia and PAX6 genetics. But also, I'm the daughter and sister of two people with aniridia. So, that's just an outline of my talk. I'll talk about my personal clinical background, my family, and then my research. And seeing as this is the European Aniridia Conference, I'll start my talk with my European connections. So I was born in Belgium. We lived in French-speaking parts of Brussels, although we spoke English at home. And I attended the European School of Brussels. Incidentally, our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, also went to that school out of interest. But unlike Boris, I was very sad when we left the EU, and I'm very pleased that we can still participate in meetings like this to see European friends and colleagues. And I particularly enjoyed meeting many of you in 2018 in Paris. So I moved from Belgium to Edinburgh for my medical and ophthalmology training. I didn't set out originally to be an ophthalmologist, but my family history sparked an interest in it, I think fairly subconsciously at first. Now I'm an academic ophthalmology registrar, what we call a resident, and recently had dedicated PhD time to do research funded by the Wellcome Trust. I'm now writing up my thesis alongside clinical work, and I won't talk much about the clinical side today because in Edinburgh we only have a large handful of patients with aniridia, so the clinical side is very modest. Big shout out to any Edinburgh patients who are in the audience. I may have met you. So the professional aspects of the talk will much more be about my research. So, first though, here's a little bit about my family with their permission. The aniridia contingent of my family are both clever people who've ended up working in computing. My father has sporadic aniridia, which was inherited by my sister, though not by my brother or by me. My dad studied natural sciences at Cambridge University in the early 70s and then switched to what was then a brand new computing course, computer science course, which was a new thing then. He subsequently worked in computing and software for Fortis Bank in Brussels latterly. He is very much reliant on his monocular. He's never driven, has an encyclopedic memory of public transport networks, as I'm sure many of you do. He has aniridia in both eyes, has had a retinal detachment, cataract surgery. He developed glaucoma before preservative-free glaucoma drops were really a thing. He has significant keratopathy now, which affects him a lot. He had a limbal stem cell transplant recently from tissue donated by my brother, along with a keratectomy. We do talk about his eyes quite often, and I feel it can be a useful sounding board now, whereas before, of course, he knew far more than I did about it. So moving on to my sister, and this is a photo taken at my sister's wedding in 2019, and that's my sister on the left and my dad on the right. So my sister is 33. She is a clinical scientist who studied at Oxford University and then in Birmingham. And interestingly, she said Birmingham was very good with assistive technology and making slides available ahead of time, things like that, and it made a huge difference to her. She now works in scientific computing in the NHS. She's a singer, sings chamber music, much easier for her if she can enlarge the music. She's had one cataract operation and takes a pressure-lowering eye drop. But with her, we often go for long periods without ever talking about her eyes, as her sight is relatively good. Our conversations recently have been much more about genetics, for example, as she chose to have molecular testing recently. Just a last word about family aniridia discussions. I think in some families with medical relatives, the medical person often has a role of, say, moderating expectations about new exciting treatments and things like that. But that's not really the case with us. And my sister, in fact, felt it was the reverse, and that she doesn't really seek anything out, but sometimes I signpost interesting research. So that is my relative perspective. And now I'll give you a little overview of my research. So whilst the molecular basis of aniridia and PAX6 disruption is broadly known, there's still unexplained areas that my research seeks to look into. And this is based in David Fitzpatrick's lab in the Human Genetics Unit in the University of Edinburgh. This is where Veronica's lab used to be, and they together built up a very large research cohort of eye malformation patients, including 400 or so, or more even, with aniridia. So a small proportion of these, and of aniridia in general, is genetically unexplained, as you know, suggesting that there could be new ways of inactivating PAX6 or additional aniridia genes. I undertook whole genome sequencing of 37 such aniridia patients, or 51 including relatives, and I spoke a little about this in Paris, but I've managed to find a cause in 60% of them, mainly structural or splicing variants affecting PAX6 in some way, and some FOXC1 gene deletions. Moving on to severe aniridia phenotypes. So most patients with aniridia have a fairly classical phenotype, familiar to all of you, I'm sure: foveal hyperplasia, cataract, glaucoma, keratopathy. However, there's a small proportion of patients who have more severe disease, which includes microphthalmia, having very small malformed eyes, which tend to not see well at all. So Veronica's lab originally identified recurrent missense mutations or missense variants as a cause of some of these severe cases, and substituting key protein residues in the DNA binding part of the PAX6 protein, the PED domain, accounted for these most severe cases. Here's a picture from our paper there, and I have been investigating the impact of these mutations in vitro in the lab, showing that they affect protein DNA binding, and that this differs depending on which DNA target you point the PAX6 protein at. Many of you here may be collaborators on the paper that we published about this, which I'll just show you a screenshot of there. I noticed that the phenotypes seen with these severe cases were very similar to those in 7 families with heterozygous missense mutations in another gene, MAB21L1, mainly affecting the arginine 51 codon. And Veronica and David have been working on these cases for a long time. After David published a similar gene, MAB21L2, not an aniridia gene. And some of our colleagues in the States have also been working on this. And this is a pedigree and some clinical images from the paper we submitted, but essentially the summary of this slide is that all these 7 families have either aniridia or microphthalmia, and 4 of them have both. I've made a poster for the conference about this, so I won't talk about the mouse work here, but suffice to say that MAB21L1 is involved in eye development downstream of PAX6, and the mechanism's not well understood yet. Elena Semina, who I think may be here, published a lovely paper earlier this year about this gene, including a family with the same mutation as our ones here, which are yet unpublished, and we're still working on the mechanistic side of that. So In summary, my research looks to fill in gaps in the understanding of aniridia genetics through whole genome sequencing of unsolved cases and characterization of these severe aniridia phenotypes. And I hope I've given you a flavour of the research and of my clinical and family connections to aniridia. And with that, I'd just like to acknowledge all my colleagues at the MRC Human Genetics Unit in Edinburgh, and particularly David, Kathy Williamson, and Hemant Bengani, and Veronica, of course, and all our collaborators further afield, some of whom are listed on the right, Aniridia Network, and my family, especially Lindsay and Nick. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nikki. That was amazing, really interesting. Sounds like you have a very scientific and kind of computing-focused family going on there. With, as you mentioned, your sister in both science and computing in the NHS as well, and your dad as well. So yeah, so you mentioned about growing up in Belgium and things. So I wondered if you had any kind of reflections or insights into kind of how this sort of education system, and obviously the ophthalmology kind of education in particular, is different maybe between our European friends and here in the UK.
So thinking about the differences, I guess, between medical systems, one major difference in ophthalmology is that a lot more things in the UK are done by community optometrists who have a much more advanced role in the UK, I think, than on the continent. So all refracting, working out what your glasses prescription, and sort of general checkups, for the vast majority of the population, are done by community optometrists in the UK, whereas I would say a lot greater proportion of the population in the continent would see an ophthalmologist regularly. However, I mean, in aniridia, you need a regular ophthalmology input regardless of which country you live in. So that is perhaps less of a factor. And I know both members of my family had very good care in Belgium and in the UK. I actually hadn't thought to ask them much about that on their thoughts of the different systems, but I know my sister's on this conference. She might have some thoughts on it in the Zoom room, although I don't want to put her on the spot.
And in terms of learning to be an ophthalmologist, or kind of your view of ophthalmology from the inside as well.
Well, so I've never worked in ophthalmology in Belgium, and I did a little bit of, prior to going to medical school in Edinburgh, I did a little bit of work experience in hospitals in Belgium, but that wasn't specifically in ophthalmology. So I'm not really best placed to talk about that, although because we have people from so many different countries on this conference, it would be an interesting thing to talk about in the Zoom room. But I mean, I do know that there are differences between ophthalmologists training in over there and it is, for example, is that the training is longer in the UK, and that is partly, I think, because nearly everyone does cataract surgery as an ophthalmologist, whereas it's slightly shorter in the in most places in mainland Europe. And perhaps not everyone does the same, has cataract surgery as their as part of their job later on, although obviously it does vary. And yeah, again, I think that'd be an interesting thing to talk about.
Okay. And how does your relatives there? How has that affected your career in terms of choosing this career, but also in terms of how you go about it? I'm wondering. You seem to enjoy trying to simplify things and speak to lay people. Has this kind of informed how you've gone about your role?
Well, when I first went to medical school, I didn't set out particularly to end up in ophthalmology, but ophthalmology is quite a niche thing, and not many I would say not many medical students, unless they know an ophthalmologist or have an eye condition themselves or have a relative with one, then they're probably not, it's not really on their radar, particularly for the first few years. And ophthalmology training is very much a postgraduate thing, unlike some of the more core general medical aspects. So although there is some at medical school, obviously, the vast majority of it is sort of postgraduate after medical school. So I would say it was on my radar from the start. And then certainly in terms of the choice of research area, it was a total coincidence, I have to say, that I ended up in Edinburgh, where Veronica and David's labs that was a total coincidence. But once I started looking into research areas, and I did consider other areas, particularly kind of neuroscience related, which is I'm interested in. But once I had the choice of an anaerogiogenetics focus for my PhD, it was very that was just very interesting given my background, and so I found it hard to walk away from that. So that's how I've ended up there. So certainly it definitely influenced the choice of research.
Yeah. Excellent. I think we need to wrap it up there, but I would like to take this opportunity to give huge thanks to Nikki for the incredible amounts of work that she's done in helping to organise this conference. Many of the speakers will know her from a number of emails wrangling various aspects of their appearances. So yeah, as well as all the rest of the team, a very special mention to Nikki for making the event yesterday and today possible. Thank you very much, Nikki.
Thanks, James. And I'd like to bounce that back to you and Dave as well. You've been absolutely incredible.